Back to Zimbabwe now, and that country is in hard lockdown again. A surge in cases recently has seen government impose a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew. It took effect last night. For more on that, I'm joined now by political analyst Takura Jangaja, who joins me from Harare. And Takura, I mean, the situation in Zimbabwe was pretty dire before the coronavirus situation, as well as the lockdown that has now come into effect. What does level 4 lockdown, hard lockdown, look like for ordinary Zimbabweans?
Well, it's a very difficult situation for ordinary Zimbabweans because they essentially can't go about their daily business as they normally do, and therefore their income streams become diminished, and therefore the future does not look bright and it does not look positive for a lot of Zimbabweans, both urban and rural.
And as expected, the focus was always going to be on saving lives, right? Let's start with that, the state of the health system. It's been in a dire state for close on 2 decades now. And, you know, if it battled to deal with situations such as the cholera situation in 2008, and you saw outbreaks of typhoid here and there from time to time over the years, one imagines that it must be pretty difficult. I mean, Nick Mangwana, the government spokesperson, pretty much sums it up to say, if you can avoid getting this virus, please do, because the words that he uses, overwhelmed and overrun.
Yes, the health system has always been overwhelmed and overrun by any pandemic, but in general, the health system has not really expanded since national independence, and access to health is not really viewed as a right. So what we're seeing is a legacy of limited access to health, and during this pandemic it becomes worse, and it means people's lives are really at stake.
And the economic situation was always going to follow next, Takura, wasn't it? Because with a hard lockdown, I mean, I'm looking at some of the measures. They're talking about essential businesses closing by 3 p.m. This includes supermarkets, non-essential ones pretty much not opening at all. What's the likely impact on a country that, you know, already was battling in terms of people having access to jobs, many people active in the informal economic sector?
Well, since the outbreak of COVID-19, people have lost jobs. That is the major impact, where COVID-19, because of the closure of businesses, unemployment has risen significantly. But also what has happened is that there's sort of like a separation between those that are rich and those that are poor. So you've got the COVID-19 affecting the poor much harder than it would those that are well off, including the fact that access to health sometimes is more easier for those that have money than those that do not. So you find that if you fall sick from COVID-19, if you have money, you can try and get some sort of treatment in a private hospital. But if you do not have money, you're probably advised to stay at home. So the political economy of COVID-19 has basically meant that those with access to wealth are better off, and those without access to wealth are worse off. And these include those that are now being faced with the prospect of unemployment due to the second lockdown.
Law enforcement, issues of human rights and draconian measures are never far from the conversation when you talk about Zimbabwe. What does enforcement of level 4 lockdown look like in as far as law enforcement is concerned, and basically ensuring that people adhere to the situation? What's the impact of that in terms of, you know, liberties and the ability to get on with life?
Well, the police have stated that you must follow the law and that they will enforce the new regulations of this lockdown. And that essentially means there will be restrictions of freedom of movement, and even in some parts, freedom of expression, where you say something that perhaps is deemed to endanger public health or public security. So essentially, it means that freedoms are restricted and people will not be able to function as normally as they would without a lockdown.
And something that was attributed to Hopewell Chingono has been circulating in South Africa about the linkages between the coronavirus situation and the lockdown in Zimbabwe, but with the long-standing perennial economic crisis in the country, and linking that to the intractable political situation in the country and basically saying, in short, that South Africa can patrol its borders with helicopters and have speedboats on the Limpopo River all we want, but for as long as this political situation in Zimbabwe is not solved, the influx of Zimbabweans into South Africa will continue, no matter what measures are taken around that situation. What's your sense about where does this current crisis of the COVID-19 and the lockdown, where does it place the trajectory towards perhaps reaching some kind of final settlement of the problems, the plethora of problems in Zimbabwe?
Well, I don't think the politics of it in relation to either settlements, governments of national unity, is that significant within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic in Zimbabwe. I don't think that there will be any prospect of any settlement. I think this government will continue as is, of course making some overtures to the opposition, but essentially it will position itself as a COVID-19 tackler or tackling government, and will try its level best to be seen as that. And in relation to the South African-Zimbabwean border, well, it's post-Christmas. The traffic generally goes up, both from the South African side and the Zimbabwean side. And taking into account the fact that Bait Bridge, for example, is a gateway not only for Zimbabweans, but also for people from Zambia, people from DRC, and so on. So it's not uniquely a Zimbabwean dilemma and Zimbabwean problem. It's a Southern African migratory problem and issue, which also has its legacy in apartheid and the colonial era. So it's not really something that you isolate to say to Zimbabwe and say that migration is within the political context of Zimbabwe will always continue to be a perennial problem. That's a Southern African issue. It's not really isolated to Zimbabwe.
Takura Jangaja, good to see you after a good number of years. That's Takura Jangaja, the political analyst in Harare in Zimbabwe. As we